Hello everyone, William Cho here from VCT Pacific, and it is currently 3:30 a.m. on the eve of Masters Madrid here in Seoul, South Korea. Why are we up at this hour recording a video? Well, there's two reasons. One is I'm partially trying to get used to the time zone of Masters Madrid, as we will be watching all the matches live on our stream. But second, since we already did a pretty extensive cover of GENG's play during VCT Pacific kickoff, I thought it was only fair to at least do a quick review on what PRX has been looking like here at VCT Pacific Kickoff. What can we expect for them going into Masters Madrid? And also do a brief touch on, why are a lot of us maybe being a little bit low on the stocks for PRX? And what could we see that's done differently that would really raise a lot of those stocks going into this Masters event? So let's dive right into it. So before we dive right into it, I want to talk numbers real quick. We should note that while they ended up playing a decent number of maps and rounds, they actually only played 3 matches and only against 2 opponents, right? They played against GENG, the eventual winners, 2 times, once in the groups, and then of course once in the grand finals. And then they played against a pretty decent looking T1 in the semifinals. So we're going to discuss compositions in general, and there are some recurring patterns here. The first thing is, okay, at the end of the day, there is a pretty heavy focus on the fact that PRX still wants to take pride in the fact that they are pretty good at going for trades, going for skirmishes, these mini tactics that allow them to have better fights and duels. Great. And which I don't think that changes just because of Magnet jumping in. I think Magnet is a great player in his own right. So overall, that philosophy, I'm cool with it. Second, obviously, there's a little bit of chaos involved in that because there's a couple ways to do it. GENG takes a much more fundamental process to go for these, advantageous trades, right? It's a numbers game for GENG and some set plays to make sure that they're eliminating certain angles. For PRX, it's actually oftentimes about creating a lot more of these angles, and we'll talk about that here in a little second. Now, the third pattern is there's a pretty heavy emphasis on ults and ult orbs. Okay, so if we just take a look at some of the different compositions, we take a look at Bind. You've got Gecko. Oh, we're going to have to change that color real quick. So you take a look at Bind. You've got Gecko and you've got Yoru, right? 2 agents that we've seen a lot of different teams try to prioritize the ult points, try to cycle through those ult orbs and make sure that you're putting on a lot of pressure with these ults that you can constantly cycle through on certain halves. Then you look at Split. Not only do you have triple duelists, but you've got that Yoru going once again. You take a look at Ascent. You've got that Gecko going once again. You take a look at Breeze. You've got that Yoru once again. Okay, you take a look at Sunset. You've got the Gecko. I mean, you've got the Sage as well that could utilize the ult to great success in certain situations, things like that. Now, obviously, most ultimates are pretty impactful in a game of Valorant, but we're talking about agents that really can you can flip an entire round on its head just with your own ultimate, and it doesn't have to be some elaborate set play, right? It's not about, and it's not going to be very telegraphed. It's not like things like the Rolling Thunder when it's like, okay, they have it, they're probably going to use it on a site exec or a retake, so we empty the site, things like that. Sure, if you see the Thrash, you probably know it's coming, but it can be recycled, so it still gets you some guaranteed space. Same thing with the dimensional drift, is that you can push in, kind of force them back as they start to hear all the whispers coming in from the different dimension, and then gain a little bit more space. So there is a certain pattern in prioritizing that. Now, there are certain compositions that don't utilize this heavily, obviously notably Lotus, where, they're kind of sticking around with different ideas that are based on the very meta compositions, except it's always going to be double duelists here for PRX, and we'll talk about the pros and cons of that as well. So we're going to take a look at 2 quick comparisons, and we're going to boil this down to pretty simple matters, so it's not going to go super in depth, and obviously there's a lot more to each team's composition and their styles, but just to give the big picture idea. And quite frankly, this is more or less the same style that PRX has been pushing for and has been quite successful with in the past years as well, just now with the with the new roster with Magnet joining in and it's slightly different colors. So the first comparison we're going to make is Split, and we're going to take a look at Carmine Corp's composition versus PRX's. Now Carmine Corp, they're going to be going with their double duelist in the Yoru and the Raze, and the double controller with the Omen and the Astra, then the Fade. Meanwhile, you've got PRX with triple duelists. It's going to be the Raze, Jet, Yoru, and then double controller. So Neither team actually having a sentinel to work with. That's something to note that is somewhat similar on both, but some pretty stark differences. One of the biggest things, and I think one of the key parts here for Karmine Corp's composition, is going to be that the fact that it's not Viper, but the Astra that's paired with the Omen. So just to exemplify the overall color that PRX likes to push for, is let's take a look at how an attacking side might pan out. So for instance, obviously Astra, you can do some neat things because you can have the Dissipate where you can recall the star and create a fake smoke and things like that. So if you have a star here in heaven and maybe you're putting some pressure elsewhere, this is not an actual smoke, but let's just say you have a star here, you can, as you have your teammates looking to push through, you can have something like a haunt over in vent, right? And then you can recall this star in male as you peek out, right? So the haunt is making sure that no one's coming in from vent. You've already got that covered. Then you're making sure that as that dissipate goes away, you have the advantage in peeking with the timing around the corner here on male. To make things even better, you could even prowler in to really push them back. So now you've taken over mid. Now, at that point, you have a couple of choices. You could, smoke off vents as well. So they're a little bit mysterious on what's going on in mid. The only way they can really do anything about it is have their own trap plays or use their own utility, right? Basically, they have to make their own presence known as well to fight back on mid. Now, once the Prowler's done there, you have some additional opportunities to push them even further. So let's say you do something like a Nova Pulse here. And this is actually, I believe, one of the things that they use. And you use a Paranoia here as you're jumping in onto the B site. Now, as this happens, the opponents are going to be pushed back further out of B heaven. And right as that goes through, now you can use an Omen Smoke, a second Omen Smoke, to cover off the stairs as well. At that point, you probably have another Astra Star ready to go. So maybe you can have another smoke coming out over here, or maybe it's down here. And then you're pushing in to this side with another piece of util. Basically, the point I'm trying to make here, though, is that even if you're not actually striking onto the B site, the fact that you have now taken over mid entirely, let's say this smoke eventually dissipates, the haunt is gone as well, and then you're pushing in here, and then you smoke off stairs as well. Now, the only options you have if you're defending B site is to really try to peek in from rafters if you want any sign of a potential execute coming into B, right? So the thing that Karmine Corp is able to do with the flexibility of Omen and Astra smokes and their other utility is the fact that you can use the various smokes and other utility, things like, of course, the Gravity Well, the Nova Pulse helps as well, same thing with the Paranoia, to push out the enemy bit by bit, right? So you can basically kind of take over mid on the initial push. And then the next one, you're taking over B heaven, right? And then the next one, you're taking over ramp and A main control with another, smoke. Maybe it's a dissipate, things like that. And by that point, and then you have the Yoru who has the gate crash as well. So the Yoru could be bouncing back and forth between all of these pushes. And now you've made your presence known across the entire map. You've taken control where you can now poise yourself for site execute at any point, and you're denying information from the opponents by using these smokes. Okay, that's the important part here, is that you're denying information. That's how you're keeping control of the map. Now let's take a look at PRX. So PRX, sure, they have a Viper, and Viper can have some toxic screens. They can have some things going on, right? So maybe they have something like this, where it's going to allow them to be positioned to go into something like ramps control. There's a variety of things you can do. Obviously, you can have the neat little screen that lets you get into the site as well and denies information. I mean, there's a couple options that you can work with here. But at the end of the day, let's just say it's somewhere. I'm not going to line this up perfectly, but let's just say it's somewhere out here. So let's just say it's somewhere out here where it allows you to lurk and get a little bit of control around ramps and then try to take over A heaven as well. Now, this is fixed. Now, on top of that, of course, you have a poison cloud that you can throw somewhere at the beginning of the round, and it can be set up. So, maybe it's additionally here, maybe it's additionally here, maybe you're helping, set up for something in B or mid, but that's pretty much fixed, right? So let's just put it somewhere over on A. And then you've got an Omen. So you have two smokes to work with. The Viper setup at the end of the day is usually almost always going to be utilized for lurks, right? So it's just to create a little bit of consistent pressure and something to work your defaults off of. But at the end of the day, unless you're actually pushing someone in here, you don't actually always have priority over this, right? You have to still use other utility and then really secure this because of how wide it is by pushing someone in there to take control. So how else can you put pressure? Well, first of all, something that PRX does really well whenever they use the Euro is just constantly jumping around everywhere, right? So they'll do stuff like they'll go for a jump peek out on B, whether it's on defense or offense, and then they'll gate crash right back over to A, and they'll constantly be adding kind of this fake pressure with the Euro utility by showing the Euro himself. Okay, cool. But again, the fact of the matter is, even if you show up here and then you jump back, the moment they put up a one-way and they scout out, maybe they use something like a Prowler if they have a fade, right? And they just regain control of B main, you are now the one working in the shadows and your own assumptions. So that's not always that reliable, depending on the map. So something that PRX will then do is, because they have 3 duelists and all 3 of them can dive or pseudo dive in the case of Yoru, what they're going to do is they're just going to use one of their members as a space controller. So, initially, let's say, whatever they use. So let's just make it simple. Let's say they use a paint shells out here, right? They're going to use a paint shells and they're going to smoke off mail. They throw it, it's clear. They send something in with the tailwind. Now you hold mid control. How are you holding it? With basically a killing machine. Someone who's just ready to frag out against whoever shows up. And this is something that PRX is very good at because all 5 of them are pretty flexible and capable of holding areas on their own. So now you've threatened that and you've taken over that position, right? And then the other 2 can now kind of flexibly move around. Or once they've held onto it for a little bit, maybe you send, Mind Freak in and then you trade places and these 3 are now going in for the site execute somewhere else. Whatever it might be, it's always based on a person rather than denying information. So it's always basically for contact. You're taking space by creating advantageous contact, by taking it over and threatening them that if you want to take this back, you're going to have to fight through me, rather than saying, rather than masking your intentions, right? You are just showing your intentions full out, but saying, I'm confident I'm going to win. And that's the general gist of it. So what are the pros and cons? The pros of this, of PRX, is that if they do show up and you get a kill, you've basically made things so much easier for yourself. The other thing is you can be much quicker, and that's really the crux of the PRX style, right? We joke about W key gaming, but at the end of the day, it's the fact that they can always stay at tempo 11. And as soon as they get a kill, they are always online to just chase. We saw this during VCT Pacific kickoff as well, where they'll get a kill early and they just push right on through. They just start to bulldoze through and they'll get into the site and things like that. It's the same thing on defense. If they get an early kill, they'll continue to push out, take that space. And a lot of these ideas kind of work on the defense as well. Now, with the triple duelist, it's not so much that you're pushing out and controlling space, especially on a map like Split, but it's a lot of the Euro peeking out, helping get space, then going off, right? And then Mind Freak is maybe holding it, or maybe Device holding it as the Viper or the Omen, and then you're holding a portion of the map. Things like that. Whereas Carmine Corp, it's much more about denying information, staying grouped, and then facilitating the rest of the map. For PRX, it's about taking space and facilitating things off of that. Now, here's another comparison, but this time it's going to actually be between these 2 teams, PRX and GENG. Now, if you watched my video on GENG, I talked extensively about how GENG really builds upon the 1-4 default, right? On most of their maps, on any type of composition, they're building upon that, and it's about a lot of push and pull, using their lurks to always create another opening. And then, of course, the 4-man squad is trying to play the numbers game where they're always going to have an advantage in trades just because of the sheer numbers on top of the fundamentals they have in covering angles and erasing some angles with abilities. Now, if you take a look at here on PRX, there is a bit of a difference. First of all, obviously, they decided to just stack 5 and they push through A, and they're actually going to do this quite a few times in the attacking half, where they just barrel through it, right? They take rubble and then they start to push through door using the Reyna and the Raze to be able to get control of that space. Then they'll have backup coming through A main, then they take over the site, and then they get the round. Now, one of the stark differences here is that it seems to be this idea that PRX is having faith that their utility will win them the fight, right? It's about, we're using this utility to fight this way, and you are going to fold over. Whereas for GENG, a lot of times, it seems to be that when they start to push, they're trying to bait out the enemy utility and then win by pure fundamentals in trading and FPS tactics, right? So it's not so much that, yeah, they have some set plays and things like that. And in fact, they'll adjust some of that tempo based on their opponents. So for instance, against teams like DRX, GENG just seems to have a lot more faith that if it comes down to like something like a 3v3, something like that, where the defense, if DRX is on the defense, they're lower on numbers, they're just not going to stack. They're always going to try to hold back and wait for information and go for a retake. So GENG feels comfortable just barreling through a site. But when they're playing against PRX, they just wait for a lot of that initial util to be used, and then they'll fight back. Now, this works on certain maps. It doesn't as well on the others, but it's this different notion that when GENG is the one attacking, or they're the ones going on the retake, it's much more about, okay, take out the utility that the enemy wants to use, then we go in as a squad and trade better. Whereas for PRX, it a lot of times is about use the util to create chaos that favors us so that we win the trades. It might sound like at the end of the day, both teams are banking on the fact that they're going to go for better trades and they're going to come out on top in numbers, which is true, but the method in the way they do it, and also therefore the tempo in which they will achieve their goals, is going to be very different. So the reason this is quite different is then what you'll see PRX eventually start to do is that it's just repeat after repeat. Slight variations, of course, depending on the scenario as well, on top of, slight twists each round just to keep them on their toes. But PRX does this a lot, and maybe they're taking a page out of Loud's book. Maybe they've always had the same idea as well of just don't fix it if it's not broke. Does an A site hit work? Keep doing it. Keep doing it until a timeout is called, or they start to block it, or it starts to get a little tougher. Or maybe you have just a complete stack of ultimates that's really good, so you have another play to flip it on its head on a different round, and then you go back to it. But PRX really likes to just force the issue against the opponents and say, so what are you going to do? What are you going to do? We're going to still push. We're still going to come at the same tempo. You thought we would slow down. You thought we'd do something different. But forget the mind games. Forget masking our attentions. We're just going to go, 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 go. Now, when they feel that it's the right time, they'll start to do things a little differently. They'll start to hit another site, and now they have certain tempos where they have certain util that's going to favor their trades on that side of the map, and then they go, 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 right? Or maybe the operator comes online like we're seeing in this round. That requires a slight different take. But because they're working off of the fact that they will create chaos that favors them in the actual fight, they will just continue to push the issue a lot more often. Whereas for GENG, it's much more about the default being repeated, but the process feeling different if you're on the receiving end, right? So maybe you're pushing and pulling. This time the lurk goes in, creates an opening, you rotate. Maybe you're always going to rotate at least once on this map, and then you create different openings. But you're always trying to react based on how does the opponent use their util in each round. Whereas for PRX, a lot of times it's kind of like, all right, we're pushing you in. No matter what your util is, here is our plan, and we know it works because we're just going to be on top of our util. We're going to dump the chaos on you, and you're not going to know what hit you. Now, last but not least, another slight difference between GENG and PRX is that even though we just talked about the overall foundational difference that I found in the composition and the style that they play and the tempo that they play, even though they're both looking for trades, another difference is that PRX is trying to disrupt Crosshairs, and this is where a lot of that chaos comes in. Whereas for GENG, they are trying to eliminate where their crosshairs might have to look. So let's use Bind as a quick example. Now, if you're GENG, this was the comp you're running, right? So you've got your Sky, you've got Brimstone and Viper as the double controllers, you got Raze as your duelist, and you've got Cypher as the Sentinel. Now, there's different variations, but this is actually one of the most simple ways to do this. So they take some B main control, right? There's a little bit of contact, sure, you take over B main, now you creep up, and you're able to use your Trailblazer. The first thing the Trailblazer will do is clear out all the close angles, right? So now you know you don't need to worry about either of these corners, right? So here and here is cleared. So that's a close quarters cleared. And then as it jumps out, you're just going to quickly scan left and right. So now you know, okay, nobody's hiding in this spot either. Nobody's hiding here. And then depending on the distance, maybe it's able to make one last jump. And you're like, okay, nobody right under window either. So the Trailblazer dies out there. Now, after that, all 3 sky smokes are used immediately. And now you're covering all the sources of backup, including window, because you didn't take that spot over. Now, maybe you use something like the paint shells to make sure that you're pushing them out already as you're getting ready to enter. And then a guiding light's going in so that you flash so they can't just peek and take out all of you instantly. While this is all going on, you blast back onto the box, and then you've got, whoever following up afterwards going into a high-low. So sure, because, you're going to play smart Valorant, you're going to create some extra angles. But the point is during this entry, what you're doing is you're eliminating all the spots that you don't want to have to think about in extra ways, right? So the flash is keeping, let's say, this part out of the question. And then, the paint shells is making sure that they can't just quickly swing out from either side. You would have seen them swing out already, or it's going to keep them kind of further back, or maybe they're going to have to back into here, things like that. You've already cleared this side, so you don't have to worry about it. For now, you don't have to worry about this until some more util flies out and you've got someone watching that trade. And then on top of that, because they're always creeping in as a group of 3 or 4, you have people looking at different angles, right? So maybe you've got the Viper watching that angle. You've got the Brimstone watching here. You've got the Raze watching here. Everyone just has to focus on one singular angle. And the whole idea is make it simple for ourselves so we don't have to worry about multiple things. Obviously, different utility can happen and other flood retakes can happen, but we've already drawn out a lot of their utility. That's usually the goal here for GENG. And now when it comes to sheer numbers, we are all set up to take these 1v1s, and as soon as someone dies, we know where that trade is going to go. So let's take a quick look at what a PRX round might look like. And something similar to this has actually happened during their match against GENG. So PRX, if they're going for a B site execute, and it's a stack, right? It's 4 or 5 people. They're going to come up here, and let's say the opponents turn on their toxic screen. So it's still here. But their idea is no, we're going to overpower you because we're going to create chaos and you're not going to know where to look or what to shoot, and you're just going to be overwhelmed. And so what's going to happen is they'll throw something like the Dizzy over the toxic screen. As it's going through, a pop flash will jump out of the toxic screen while the Raze is double satcheling through the site. The Yoru jumps down on this side, and so does the Gecko on that side. Suddenly, instantly, there's like 4 to 5 different things that you either have to shoot, look at, or turn away from. And basically what PRX is saying is, not only are we, this isn't even like a flood, it's just a sudden drop of an entire squad, right? Of things, not even just agents, right? But it's things like the Dizzy, or sometimes it's, maybe a Prowler is going through. Oh, I think in this one, they even throw a Haunt in there as well. So there's Haunt that you might have to shoot as well. And it's all just instant. So the moment the fight starts, there's already like 4 to 5 different targets that you either have to shoot, turn away from, or just hide from. Where now PRX, because they know exactly what's about to happen through their execute onto the site, they're going to have the advantage because the opponents won't know where to leave their crosshairs. So the difference here is if you're GENG, you're eliminating where to look and everyone just focuses on one side. Whereas for PRX, they're saying, we're going to make you not know where to look by shaking up your crosshairs, and that's how we will win. Because we thrive in this tempo, we've been practicing this, this is how we play Valorant, and that's a lot of the motto they have. Right? We saw this a lot last year, even when Jing was on the roster, and you see it a lot. Even in that split comp with the triple duelist, that time it's not even things like the Dizzy, it's just the duelists, all 3 of them, jumping onto the site at different, heights and different tempos and different distances to really disrupt your crosshairs. And then either all of them or some of them are going to get the kills to clear the site, whether it's on an execute or a retake. So with this all in mind, let's take a look at the compositions they used. First up, we'll just go in order, it's Bind. Now, very unsuccessful because he only played it once and it was against GENG and it did not do well. Now, we should note this was the 4th map. By the time this was happening, GENG was really just feeling the hype. They were really going with the momentum. They seemed to have a really strong read on PRX's composition. But we should also note there are some lacking weaknesses of this composition that PRX brings. So the first thing is okay, the whole idea of causing chaos, it's a bit of a zoo comp, right? You've got Prowlers, you've got everything that Gecko can throw that's going to create chaos. You've got the Boombot and the paint shells, and then you've got decoys on top of it as well. And then you've got a flying Raze with double satchels. Cool. The idea of disrupting crosshairs as you're going into any portion seems sound. However, the moment you use it once, you're kind of done other than Gecko. And I feel like this might be why, obviously in general, Gecko is really finding a resurgence now with Sky being nerfed a little bit. But I think PRX really favors this a lot because then they can use it to get in once, and then they still have some backup plans afterwards. Now, again, with the Fade, sure, you have 2 Prowlers and things like that, but the idea is once you get in, the big scary portion of your composition is done and dusted. And then on top of that, you only have 1 controller. Oftentimes on an execute or a retake, you're going to use all 3 smokes at once. So, or if you're defending, maybe you already use your smokes to delay. So once you're on the site, like once you've kind of made your intention known, there isn't much else to do than frag out. Now, there's a little bit more reach, especially if you're on the attack, or maybe even if you're on the defensive side, with the different mollies, right? So you've got, obviously, the molly on Brimstone, you've got the mosh pit. I guess you could count something like the paint shells or the seas as well for a little bit of delay. But a lot of that can be drawn out pretty easily. And then if you're on the attacking side, something that we saw that GENG take advantage of a lot is there's no sentinel. There's no agent that's really built to be a lurker on this team other than you just have to lurk and get kills. I guess Euro kind of fits the bill because he can teleport. So you can't just sit back and know that you can buy a lot of time with the lineups because you don't know when they're going to go for the flank. So overall, yes, in terms of the immediate fights, the tactics from one turn to the next seems very strong, seems to suit the PRX style quite well. We're going to need to see some adjustments if this comp really wants to deliver in the long distance of maybe you're always pushing through, right? You're just pushing. You're actually W keying forever to make sure that you're winning out, whether you're on the attacking or defensive side, or you're just going for the contact earlier in the game and holding on to your util for a lot longer. Now let's look at split. Okay, quite frankly, while it got a little close with T1, considering the overall philosophy we just discussed for PRX, this fits the bill. If anything, I would say they could take a page out of Carmine Corp's book and replace the Viper with an Astra, and they might be able to do a bit more with that as well. Now let's take a look at the Ascent composition. Again, there's some ideas here with the Zoo comp. Actually, quite frankly, a lot of the things that they were trying to do was they were trying to cause chaos in B by jumping in through their own smokes to to really overwhelm the opponents if they're going to the B site. And then on the A site, they had some just solid set plays that they were trying to repeat with things like the C's paint shells and then the mosh pit with the Dizzy on top of it as well, and the Paranoia just to clear sight. So kind of, all allowed with their current composition, where you have all this util to make sure that all the annoying corners and little cubbies are cleared, and then you just barrel onto the site. Afterwards, you're just able to hold it in a post plan. Considering everything we just discussed for PRX, this actually does have some legs on Ascent, in my opinion. However, the problem is you need to be, I feel like you need to be quite wary of how you're using the toxic screen. Like that's your biggest tool to constantly mask your intentions before the chaos begins. And again, if you're not able to keep up at speed 11 all the time like you did with GENG, which I'm just going to say outright, you just can't do that anymore because you don't have GENG. And it's not because Monyet is a worse player. It's just simply that's a GENG thing to do. You got to change the tempo a little bit. On that note, let's skip down to Lotus real quick. This change in composition, it was a weird one because they won with the Jet initially against GENG. Now, of course, GENG, they went through the trial by fire by going through the play-ins, and maybe they looked stronger. Maybe there were some other discussions that PRX was doing to make this agent change. But at the end of the day, I think part of the change from Jet to Reyna that actually could help PRX in theory is that it slows things down, which, again, on paper, should be assisting Monyet to also be able to play at his own pace just a little bit, right? You can just take one more breath before the chaos ensues that you can set up for it. I think there's some merit to it. Now, do I like the composition overall? Not really. Not really. It still got close. It was still an 11-13 scoreline, but I'm not going to sit here and say like this is the future of Lotus. But what I will say is okay, rather than just going super fast, jet race, barrel through, overwhelm the opponents every time, okay, Go with something where you can like fight for robo control or fight for mound control, and then you have one more turn, right? Maybe use the first Leer in the first fight, the second Leer in the second one. You still got a second guiding light as well, things like that. And then you're able to just take one more breather before you just all dash onto the site. Okay, I'm starting to see that maybe there's an okay reason for this. On top of that, we know that PRX can use the whole Leer guiding light combo quite well, so yeah, I'm cool with it. Now let's return. Okay, so the Breeze composition is a little different. This is one where they will deny information a little bit. It's actually kind of interesting that they use this over on Breeze, but they're not using it on something like Split. So what they're going for here is, because the sites are so big and the map is so large, rather than saying we're just going to barrel onto the site and overwhelm you because you know it's very, very large and very, very wide, this is the map where PRX will say, we're going to cut off the map into different pieces. We're just going to deny all the different angles and then overwhelm you. So basically they're saying we're going to turn Breeze into our own little split, right? So you're going to take a map that's this big and they're going to say, nope, we are fighting right in this triangle only. You know, you put up like a toxic screen, you put up a high tide, you put up a cascade, and you're like, all right, who wants to fight? That's the way that they were playing Breeze on either side of the map. I think it's okay. It probably needs to be cleaned up a little bit, and maybe some adjustments need to be made. But the turbo controller, it had its reasons. Now, it's a little bit weaker on the defensive side, because if they're pushing out from different areas when there's smokes, again, Breeze, you can't really hold on to it by contact. You can't just plant someone in mid and expect them to win all the fights coming at all different directions. So this is the part where the whole we're going to take space with an agent and then plant them there to keep control isn't going to work as well as it might on a map like, let's say, Split or something like Ascent, things like that. So maybe it needs a little bit of work on the defensive side. Maybe you eventually do want to bring back a Sentinel so you have a much stronger anchor. But overall, again, it seems like they're saying, okay, how do we play to our strengths, or how do we play to our strengths on Breeze? Now, last but not least, a unique anomaly here in Sunset. The no duelist composition. We discussed this in our in an earlier YouTube video as well, but this one was very clearly specifically set up for this map, and this is probably the one where we actually saw, I think, the most logic that was tangible behind their composition and the way they were playing. It was so systematic. Now, granted, this was also the first match that they played against GENG. They had a great start, and Forsaken was just snowballing with the Outlaw like none other throughout the entire first half when they started on defense. But the whole idea of Sage complementing the whole retake strategy on a map like Sunset, being able to clear out early areas with something like the 0 point and the Dizzy, and then rotating over, getting ready for a fast retake, getting ready for the delay with things like the Mosh Pit and the Slow Orbs, things like that. Overall, a pretty sound strategy, and perhaps the most different one. This one does not rely on them overwhelming their opponents in an instant flood with all different targets. This one is actually much more a kind of GENG-esque style, where you're saying we're going to eliminate certain angles, we're going to cut off certain backup, and now fight by having the advantage in numbers and angles. Now, while they've had a little bit more time, I can't imagine you're going to flip your entire color on its head. So you have to imagine that they're still going to try to play an aggressive style. The question is can you find a format that gives you these moments that fit the bill for a PRX W gaming meta in your own maps? This tournament at Masters Madrid, it's going to have some of the best players and the best teams. I mean, it always does at an international tournament, but I think this one, that's been the narrative, is that literally any one of these could win, and on any given day, all these teams can shoot back at the other team. So it's not just a matter of some team is just going to bulldoze through the earlier stages just through pure firepower. I don't think that's going to happen. So PRX can't rely on that anymore to get through the earlier stages as quickly. So the question becomes, which one of these maps and compositions will they change? I'd love to hear your opinion in the comments down below. Do you think that these compositions are good enough? Or do you think one or two agent changes could actually facilitate the PRX style a little bit better on some of these maps?